Okay, everybody, welcome to Corporate Underground for another amazing session. My name's Finn Hanlon, and I'm joined with my amazing panelists, guests, and friends. Today's topic is a topic that I'm really passionate about. It's called Learning to Unlearn. And it's about what to do and how to go about dealing with systems and processes when they don't work anymore. Look, I think we all know that we're a product of our environment. It's a network effect whereby we're constantly influenced by stuff day in, day out, and we become a product of that. So technology is changing so fast, it's forcing us to change. And so things are happening in our lives whereby we're fed so much information on a day-by-day basis, yet a lot of the people I work with, I talk to, haven't been taught the process to learn how to filter information, how to learn how to step back and think about unlearning when they're in a position where it's no longer working anymore. And so, you know, typically I have a process which I use, which keeps me in a process. It's sort of a background process, which keeps me in a process of unlearning. And it's basically 6 steps, which I'll just put out to the group, and then we can actually have a conversation around it. So for me, one of the first steps I have, which I'm constantly working on, is continually proving to myself that what I know to believe to be true is actually true. The second thing that I often do is I force myself to ask myself, is there another way? Curiosity. How do I manufacture? How do I keep curious, right? Also acknowledge that actually what I might know might not actually be true. Just the acknowledgement doesn't mean that it is true or not true, but what is true? How did I learn that? You know, is it an experience that I've learned? Is it learned behavior? Is it from some sort of education process? This one's really important. I find I've got to give myself time and space to be able to think. And in this constant avalanche of overload, I find that what most people do is they're so about optimizing their life that they're taking headlines and then they look for a number of headlines and then that validates whether it's true. And it's quite interesting to me because people are sharing headlines which are creating the effect of it's true, even though it might not be. And the last one is to actually ask a trusted friend or a third party just to validate, you know, what you're thinking. So they're little things that I do in terms of making sure that I actually understand there's a process of unlearning, which is getting to a place that I don't know and thinking about the things that I do know that might not be true. I'd like to put it to the group about this process of unlearning. You know, do you think it's valuable? Why? What processes do you use? And how do we know when we're in a zone when we actually are cultivating that process of unlearning? So I'll throw it to my esteemed colleagues here. Adam, what do you think, mate?
Yeah, look, I'm just thinking about it. For me, it's listening to your process and thinking about, I'm trying to find examples in my mind of times where I've had to unlearn. And for me, I think it's not dissimilar to your process. There's a lot of constant questioning. There's a lot of ongoing curiosity. And I think it's about being adaptive and responsive to new information. And so, you know, to me, the unlearning piece is less about knowledge as much as it is about behavior and about testing your own biases and saying, look, you know, I have been in this space for a really long time and now I'm trying to pull back on that and maybe accept that there's another path. And so it's actually as much behavioral as it is the knowledge base itself.
But do you actually think about it from are you consciously aware of that unlearning is a valuable tool, or do you just like me, have a background process which keeps you curious?
No, look, I probably, if I'm being honest, I don't think of it actively on an ongoing basis. I think curiosity is part of just how I'm made up anyway. The one time I absolutely did do it is when I started investigating the democracy stuff and got to a point where, in fact, I did need to unlearn everything that I had learned and everything society was trying to tell me to say, wow, actually, what we think we know about this space is very different to what I think the evidence shows us. And so that's probably the only time I've really actively.
So how did you get to that? Because that to me is really fascinating. It's like, because people can listen to this, people that are watching this vodcast or podcast or whatever you call it. It's. I want to pull you up on that. So when you decided that you needed to unlearn, how did that happen? What was that questioning that you made you go, I need to rethink this?
I think when it was clear to me that the evidence of the behavior of the system was in direct conflict to what I had been taught what the system was about. And when I could no longer correlate those two things, and I had to say, hang on, but it's meant to do this, but it's doing this other thing, maybe I need to unlearn what I've been taught to say, actually, the people who told me about democracy didn't really understand what democracy was.
Yeah. Tia, what do you think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love this topic. It's one of my absolute favorite ones. And quite consciously, for the last couple of years, I've been trying to declutter. And with decluttering, physically came the mental part of this decluttering process. In terms of an actual I love the points that you put. And I think that these are a great way to recognize consciously or subconsciously what it is that we're actually doing when we are learning something and when we're not. I also think there's a big piece on transitioning. So the moment that we actually learn something, we're already transitioning away from the way that we used to think about something. And so as we integrate these new learnings, we're sort of moving into this new, mindset. And in that new mindset is a process of recognizing that something that you may have held to be true may not be true anymore. In that sort of step is this, questioning of, do I need to hold this anymore? Is this appropriate to hold anymore? And if it's not, before, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I would continue to sort of think about it. I just would let it go. But more consciously now, I'm sort of letting it go. So to give you an example there, I was, clearing out my cupboards and I found this tracksuit bottom from, when I was 18. And I looked at it and I thought, God, I might still fit into it. And letting that go was like letting go of a memory that just didn't serve me anymore. So it's like a really fascinating way of using the physicality of the exercise just as much as you can the mental aspects.
I find it fascinating that because technology is changing so fast and forcing us to change in a lot of ways, is that what might be true and might be valuable a day ago might be different to what is true now. And if we're not equipped with the tools to be able to adapt, then we can often find that we're getting left behind, which causes another whole set of pain. So what do you think?
But it might be questionable, right? Of whether
true,
you really whether that's even really appropriate, because, you may get the feeling and sensation that, gosh, if I'm not a sensational influencer on Instagram, I'm a nobody. Well, that may not be the case.
Yeah, 100%. Tony, what do you think?
I just think that this is very interesting because I would always thought myself as someone that would follow this naturally, because you talk about a fast moving world, right? And that we have to adapt quickly and always think differently. I think professionally, I was killer at this. Okay. I was always someone that came in and saw people doing things very differently and I didn't understand why. So I was always felt like I was always agile there. But then I would say, and I only can say this now because I'm actually doing this, but I would say personally, I was the opposite. Okay. I was very locked in the way I thought. I wasn't challenging my beliefs or my assumptions. I wasn't giving myself time to even think about things that I valued personally. Okay, so at work, I may be able to go, what's the newest, way to do a, ad campaign? What's the newest technologies? Are we doing this right? Let's audit this. Let's try something new, even if it means restarting again. But I find it interesting that I was so far off from that in my personal, and literally, I'm talking about the last few months that I feel like I'm actually making real headway in this sort of challenging myself in these areas. You got to find, I think, not just a trusted third party, because family and friends can be trusted, but they don't often, I feel, will challenge you. Okay, because I feel like they know you, and a change sometimes can be scary in someone you really care about, because I think everyone has this natural fear of change, which is why I feel like people don't actively try to change their life. And you got to find someone that you trust that maybe implements this in their life or is trying to implement this in their life, and also knows you enough, like maybe has a deeper connection, but without the history. Like I would say, like this is Matt in my world right now. It's like we've got to know each other really well over the last 18 months. And he's someone that won't let me take an inch, like if I'm being a cop out, he'll let me know and he'll say, are you sure about that? And then I sit back, and only now that I've got the headspace to process it, well, I go, you know what? I've just always thought that because I believed that for the last 30 years of my life, but I've never thought of it from your point of view. And I think that is terrifying to do.
Yeah, Maddie, what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, unlearning information's in itself, I'm with Tia, it's quite freeing to get rid of it. I think for a long time, I just took on all the information I possibly could. I'd look at both sides of both arguments. It used to piss people off greatly because be arguing one point one week, and then I'd be arguing against myself the next week against someone else. And I've got nephews and nieces that are infuriated with me. I've got brothers that are pissed off with me, and they're business partners because I always played devil's advocate because I wanted to know more. But as I'm getting older, there's just so much misinformation that's being passed about. There's just so much information. So I think it's a lot more important to sort of like siphon through to be able to work out what your true values are. Now, Tony was very kind then, but it's a lot easier to pick apart somebody else than it is to pick apart yourself, to actually do that yourself and go deep. I mean, I've been doing that recently for myself, and it does take a lot of energy and time, but you've got to have that. I think COVID's been really good for us for that because we've finally been left alone a little bit. And when I first went into it, it was like, 8 meetings a day, video conference. And now I'm like, I can't do that. I've got to have that space to settle, to process it. Now, very much like there was a drive between appointments, was the ability to take and settle and process what I needed to keep and what I needed to get rid of. And I think that as we're getting older, particularly for me, I've got a strong history of Alzheimer's in my family and watching my mother go through it, and she's unlearning a lot of information that's really important. But then I'm looking at it and going, well, what is really important? And what she seems to remember is the key things like my face and family members, but it just keeps unpacking and unpacking. And you start to look at, what do I want to remember?
There seems to be a common thread here about freedom, about being able to get rid of information or being able to unclutter. And, we are in a world of clutter and so much information, but, who here thinks also that, it's really, really important to have a process around uncluttering and being able to create space. That's one of my things, is to be able to have space. I have my own process. Who else thinks that that's a valuable thing, space?
Yeah, I think listening to everybody else talk, I think for me the interesting thing about this is the dissection between challenging beliefs because of new information and things that you think but are not necessarily behaviorally or emotionally tied to, as opposed to things that are a little bit deeper and more entrenched. So for example, unlearning religion. If you've been deeply religious and then you start to question that, it's not just the thought, it's everything about the practice of your life has to change. Who you spend time with and how you spend your Sunday and, what you eat and where you go. And so it's that kind of unlearning that to me is super interesting, because it challenges viscerally everything about your existence rather than just a knowledge piece.
Yeah.
So Tony,
Kind of feels like this existential aspect, doesn't it?
Tony, you were.
Yeah, I grew up. Funny, I didn't grow up religious. I sort of got into it when I was older, but I was still influenced by it. And now I've sort of stepped away from that. And it is one of those things, challenging, like so I said, challenging beliefs that you've had your whole life. But you know what I think plays a part in this? Finn touched on, like social media and so busy in a hectic world, right? If I, like, when you go to sit down on the couch and your partner says, "Oh, can you just go get me that from the kitchen?" It is the most brutal thing in the world to get back up off that couch and then go do something. And like, so it is that in your life though. Okay. So when you are being hit from everything, and I'm talking like advertising, I'm talking about social media, I'm talking about everything that is weighing on your mind. If someone says, "Are you sure you really believe in, or should you actually, you need to work on yourself. You need to actually see if you truly believe in this." You're going to go, "Frick, I'm too tired to try and change something that deep in me." You really actually have to have the headspace to make a positive change or any change in your life, let alone let alone even like the idea that you need to consider these things. Like someone may go, look at all these steps that you talked about, Finn, and go, nah, like, I don't know, this like, I feel like unless you're in the right headspace, they're going to hear a lot of this and go, "This is bull crap. Like, these guys are
But
idiots."
that's the thing, Tony, about going around in circles. You there is going to be one time in your life when you think, right, enough is enough. Like I've been through this once before. I'm not going to go through this again. There's clearly something that I'm not doing, or something that I would like to do that I don't know that I should, without the expectations, of course, of like should and shouldn't. But the moments where I've learned the most to unlearn have been times where it's been quite difficult for me. Like Matt, with your mom, isn't it interesting that in later life we do have this experience of whether it is Alzheimer's related or not, we do have this experience of almost qualifying what it is that we are, who we are, and that identity that Adam was talking about, and then how that identity relates to the education or the evolution of our own education about ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's really valid. When I opened my intro monologue, I sort of mentioned when systems and processes no longer work anymore, and I framed it in that because that is often the catalyst for change. But for me, I love being curious, and a lot of people look at these steps and go, "It's just too much work." But for me, just being curious and just developing curiosity is the start of the pathway of unlearning, because the pathway of being curious helps you validate, helps you identify. It follows a natural pathway without you having to think about doing all these things. And it starts to beg the question, well, where did I learn this from? How do I know it's right? How do I validate it? And that's just being curious. And that's something that I believe is innate in everyone. And if people, as you say, Tia, when you're going through a tough time, it tends to be the time when you start questioning things. But when you can harness that power, it tends to be, at least in my opinion, when you can harness that power in times when you're not going through things, you can really start to sort of, come to the next level. I think the way I phrase it, I don't know what the technical term is, but
I agree, Finn. I think, sorry, Matt, I just wanted to add on to that, Finn. Like, I think there's going to be naturally fear in a person. I know that's like, as well as that feeling of tired. But as someone that had this description of myself a while ago, like, how do you feel? I just feel tired. It wasn't physically tired. It was just like your head was just tired. You would never consider this, and you would have fear of then implementing this in your life. But someone that's doing this like now, and on, I guess, the other side of it a bit, I would say, do it for that sense of freedom, not just in that sense of curiosity, because you can get that true sense of freedom.
But Tony, I'd be saying if you're tired and you're worn down, I'd be saying be curious about why you're tired.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you worn down?
Exactly. But asking a tired person to get off the couch and go get something is like pulling teeth. So like if you can do it now before you get to that state, not just for curiosity, but for that sense of freedom you get when you actually feel like you've got this stuff sorted, because everything you're doing is truly for your own freaking desire.
But Tone, I also think that there's a significant distinction between being curious, which helps you learn that maybe something you knew before wasn't right or challenges a belief, and having the courage to then change your behavior and change what comes thereafter. And so I think there's kind of two stages to this. There's the bit that says, I'm prepared to look and explore and understand and question. And then that's the easy part, in my opinion. The hard part is then having the courage to go, now I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to live differently, or I'm going to think differently, or I'm going to advocate differently. I'm going to stand up for a different side than
I think it's a gradual thing, though. I mean, it's very rare unless you've had a major impact in your life about something that's hit you, to actually go, I'm going to change. Sometimes it's a friend group, it's a lifestyle, it's a whole area, and those things take a lot of time, and you've got to have a catalyst that actually makes that happen. I'm really interested in Finn's process, because I mean, I'm probably a little bit more like you, AJ, in that I do what feels right, and my barometer is based on certainly friends, but I always do what I'm going to do because it makes me feel good, and if it makes me feel good, I'm going to continue to do it. If it makes me feel bad, I want to limit that. So it's your barometer, but where did that barometer come from? It came from friends and family and things that led me down a certain path. I think a lot of this unlearning, I mean, like, Finn, I'm really impressed that you've got a system, like, and you actually step it through. I don't have that. I mean,
I do that, Matt, for a specific reason, because I realized my inadequacies of continually inventing things all the time and the amount of work it takes to continually invent things. And when I'm doing it time after time, I'm like, well, I just need to build a process. And I learned from business, when I'm faced with challenges, it's really simple. Just put a process in place and deal with it. And so that's part of my process that I've learned through my business life is when you do something, put it in a process.
I put a process together for pretty much business and lots of things, but I haven't put a process together for this. So it's a really interesting point. And why haven't I done so? I'm not sure. You know, I'll have to have a look.
Now you're curious.
I am. I actually am. We'll be calling after.
Essentially, this is a process to challenge processes, though, isn't it? It's kind of ironic that this is a process to figure out whether your process.
Ultimate process.
Yeah, is your process still relevant? Well, here's a process.
It's a recursive loop. It's a recursive loop.
It does sometimes feel like that, right? Sorry, Adam.
Do you reckon there's a danger, Finn, of if you do it too much and you pre-program yourself to challenge everything that you end up believing in nothing, that you're just constantly questioning everything?
No, because I think you're validating. There's nothing wrong with questioning because it's the validation that comes in sort of you're building your core beliefs on a bit stronger bedrock. So it's even when I say, look, I believe that things change over time. So I have this thing which I call the misunderstanding of understanding. And the principle is this, that back in the old days, people believed the earth was flat because the available evidence at that time said the earth was flat. And they look around, it looks flat, the sea's flat, how could it possibly be round? But then with the advent of technology and science, we learned that the earth was round. So that the viewpoint changed. But does it change the fact that when you thought it was flat, based on the available evidence, it was flat? No, but the ability to continuously question based on new and upcoming evidence gives you a viewpoint, which means that you still have a bedrock, but it means that you are able to unlearn an old way of thinking and look at a new way of thinking because you're not blocking out that new information when it's coming to light.
So why are so many people going back? Because there are people now that believe in a flat earth again. When all the science comes back from another point that you're looking at, not arguing very strongly and passionately that their beliefs are right. And I look at it and go, that's insanity. Like everything seems to be.
It's my truth. It doesn't mean that I'm telling you it's true, but that was my my answer anyway, Adam. I think.
Yeah, we only got 5 minutes. I believe that's true. Man, we only got 5 minutes. Like, but just on that,
go back that other way though. They're unlearning information as well, and that's saying, hey, we've been lied to. We're now going back. So what stops that from happening?
But look, this is not a tool that you have to. I just do it, and this is a topic that I'm passionate about. You don't have to follow this, but for me, it's that. I'm certainly not getting amplified about it. It's just my viewpoint is that I believe that unlearning is a very valuable tool. Whether you use it or not, it's up to you. But I just don't think it's a topic that people are talking about, hence why I bring it to Corporate Underground, because it's not something that you see a lot of people talking about unlearning. The process of unlearning, is it valuable? To me, that's a valuable conversation.
No, but I agree with you 100%, and I'm not saying that, but when people take it the other way and they start unlearning factual things, or they're taking that point, you've got things that we've agreed, like there's people walking around that say, I'm not going to wear a mask. This is all a scam. People are dying.
But they might have things in their wheelhouse which they're trying to project or protect. And so they're looking at pieces of available evidence to give them the viewpoint that clarifies to themselves that what they're thinking is right. Whether it's right or not is not.
I love that, right? Because ultimately it is about who you are at that moment, whether you believe it or not. It's everything that you've learned up until that point. And you can completely and utterly with 100% conviction say, this is true. And the reality might be something completely different. And I think that's that's what I'm going to take away today, which is
but having it 100% true, Tia, but knowing the tools that if the information changes, you're still open to it.
Yeah, it's totally different. Like you could use this process and go, I'm going to use this to prove something that everyone might say is unfactual. But if you stay stuck in that, then you're not really getting the soul of this. You're not really getting the point of like unlearning, is it? If you do it once to unlearn something and then gets fixated in that and never change your mind again, then you're not really getting the purpose of it.
Well, everybody knows that you guys are all a figment of my imagination, and I'm standing at a wall going, no!
Just take those meds.
Your imagination.
Awesome.
Adam, did that answer your question, by the way?
I was going to say, Matt, if we're a figment of your imagination, you have to be one sick bastard to think of us, let me tell you.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and stay tuned for some more amazing stuff.